Well, hello everybody. Welcome to 101 Mixing Tricks Q&A webinar for April. Sorry I was a little late getting in here, but I've been having trouble with the webinar software, and just at the very last minute we seem to have gotten it together. So let me just do a couple other things and then we'll get right to it. You'll be able to either ask me a question via chat, which you'll see in a second, or you'll be able to ask one live if you'd like in just a little bit. So let me get another panel here that you can't see. And let's try something here. All right, can everybody see that? Everybody see what I just sent there? Let's see. No, I don't see anybody. I'm hoping you guys can see me. Actually, can someone just type something in the chat box and say, yes, I can hear you, and yes, I can see the screen, just so I know it's working. It's telling me that people are in here. I see Jason and Eric and William and Oliver, Lavius, John, and Jean-Luc are here. So anyway, help me guys. Just, okay, Jason just sent something here. Okay, so looks like you guys can see me. I'm hoping you can. Once again, if you can see me, just type something in and say, yeah, I can see you. Yes, I can hear you. Everything's cool. Okay? Yeah, you can't. Okay, William said, I can hear you, but I can't see you. Yeah. And that's what Jason said. Okay, yeah, but you're seeing the screen that says Q&A webinar, right? Because that's what you should be seeing, not me. You should be seeing the Q&A webinar screen. Yeah, Jean-Luc says, I can't see you. Yes, you won't be able to see me, but again, you should be able to see a screen that says Q&A webinar. So just tell me that you can see that. I'm just typing something here. Okay. Okay, so you guys can see the screen. Good. That's what we'll need right now, and a little bit we'll actually take some questions here from you guys. Good. All right. This is the first time I've been using this software. It's called Webinar Jam. It's fairly new and it's pretty cool. And as you can see, it's an overlay of Google Hangouts. And that's cool because we can actually bring people in and out of the conversation, but also it can broadcast to a lot more people. So there's a lot of you here today, and I'm really happy. A lot more than on the normal teleconferences that we have. So this is cool. All right, let's go to the first question here. And these are a couple of questions that I received either via comments on the various tricks or via some emails. And some of you might see your name here. Thank you for the question, by the way. And I think I might have answered it before, and I might have answered you directly, but just so everyone gets the benefit of this, that's why I'm putting it in here. So here's the first one. What about using a compressor with a wet-dry control instead of duplicating the track? And this has to do with the individual track parallel compression trick, number 15. Basically what that is using parallel compression on a track, and it might be, again, a drum track. Kick and snare is what we usually use it on, sometimes bass, sometimes we'll use it on the guitar. Just about anything you might use individual parallel compression. And of course, what you do in that case is you're taking up an extra track. You're duplicating the track so you can have one track with the compression, one without. And that way it gives you the best of both worlds. So you get the punch and attack of the track without the compression, and then you get the fullness of the track with the compression. So in this case, what happens is there are many compressors out now that allow you to actually mix between wet and dry. Wet and dry meaning mix between compression and not compression, no compression. What that means is it's doing the same thing. It's internal parallel compression, so you don't have to duplicate a track. So this is pretty cool if you have that possibility with one of your plugins or an outboard device, because many of them are coming like this anymore. Yeah, use it, because it just makes life a whole lot simpler. How are you going to set it? Well, that's up to you. Again, you want a lot of punch, and yet you still want the attack. So you might try a 50-50 and then go a little bit either way until you get exactly what you need. All right, so that's number one. Let's go to the second one here. This is from Jeff. Jeff says, essentially it looks like we're creating the Haas effect with reverb. And what he means is, this is from number 22, the massive track reverb trick. And the massive track reverb trick, what it does is it takes the reverb and you shorten it up. So in other words, you take the decay and you make it as short as possible, and then you'll add it to an instrument. And it's a very unique sound because it just sounds like a very interesting large and small room at the same time. That's what's cool about it. It sounds really big, and at the same time it sounds small because it's short. You'll hear this a lot on records, especially on guitars. This has been used for a long time. So it says, as Jeff says, essentially this looks like we're creating the Haas effect with reverb. Yes, as a matter of fact, it's something similar. It's not exactly the same because usually we can't make the decay of the reverb as short as the Haas effect. Usually we can get down to 100 milliseconds or so, which isn't enough. The Haas effect is anything 40 milliseconds or less. So this is sort of like the Haas effect, not exactly. Either way, it's a very, very cool trick. So that's that one. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is from Norm. Let's see, is Norm in this room here? No, Norm's not on the call. And Norm says, okay, Bobby, I'm a true believer. I've been utilizing these tricks and it gets better with every step. I still have a load of questions. I'm experimenting with different aspects of fine-tuning the mix, beginning with the basic tracks. Instinct is a good guide. A lot of it is guesswork. So I'm looking at your books. Which book or combination of books is going to offer the most comprehensive info one could have on hand? As you may or may not know, I've written a couple books on mixing. And this course kind of came out of those in a way. The first one was way back in 1999. It was the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. That was the first edition. And now it's in the third edition that was just published last year. And that's probably the best one. It has a lot of these tricks in there, as a matter of fact. And like I say, this course kind of came from that because I was collecting all these tricks for the books. And what I found was that, well, I have these tricks, and it's one thing to write them down. It's another thing to actually show people how to do them. So that's the reason for the course. But that being said, the book has a lot more stuff. It has just a lot more about the theory behind arrangements. And arrangements is so important in a mix. A lot of mixers find that what they're doing is actually constructing the arrangement as they go along. So mixers many times are given free rein, basically saying, okay, do what you have to do to make this sound good, which means they'll many times mute a lot of tracks, especially like in verses. There'll be too much going on, so a mixer will mute some stuff, and then the second verse comes around, and he might not mix as many things. And the third verse, he might have everything in there, so the track builds, which is what you're trying to do. So anyway, that theory behind that, and all of the interviews that I did with all these mixers are all included in the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. There's 24, I think, and goes through the legendary engineers, Al Schmidt and oh yeah, and I can't think of them. Elliot Shiner is another one, right up until some of the really hot new guys that are doing a lot of the hits on the radio. So there's another book that I've done. If you're brand new to mixing, and this seems like it's a little ahead of you, many of the things here, there's a book called The Audio Mixing Bootcamp that I've written. And the Audio Mixing Bootcamp is this kind of a step-by-step way to mix. So it will have you experiment with things that sound good and don't sound good. And you know, if you're starting and you feel like you're not comfortable with a lot of these things that we're talking about, that's a good place to start. So either one of those. All right, so let's go to the next one here. This is from Kurt. Kurt says, do you find it more difficult to make a mix sound full and balanced that only features 3 male vocals, aggressive vocals, 1 guitar with no lead, and at times, I think he means a djembe, I can't say it right, or a violin. It should be easy theoretically, but I'm finding it harder for some reason to make it sound really professional. Well, here's the way it works. Generally speaking, again, you'll find this in the Mixing Engineer's Handbook, and I know in certain places I mentioned it, you know, within the 101 Mixing Tricks course. The way this works is that as a mix, as an arrangement gets fuller and fuller, each element, mix element, has to be smaller. So in other words, if you have a lot of tracks, the only way to fit them in is to make them all smaller. Oh, sorry about that. And you do just the opposite when it comes to having just a few elements, a few mix elements. What you do is you'll actually make them bigger. So in this case, there's, let's see, really 3 mix elements and maybe 4. All the 3 female vocals, if they're all singing together, you can classify them as 1 element. The guitar, of course, is a 2nd element, and the djembe is another one, and the violin is another one. So if they're all playing at the same time, there's 4 elements. And what that means, but again, even though there's 4 elements, there's not a lot of other things that are going on at the same time. So instead of making each of them smaller, what you're going to try to do is make them bigger to fill out the mix. And that's the whole secret there. The fewer instruments you have, the bigger they all have to be. How do you make them bigger? Well, with EQ, a little more of the lower mid-range, and give them more, you know, some body, 80, 100 cycles somewhere in there. And all of a sudden things will get bigger and they'll get thicker. And the same thing with reverb. Now, the Abbey Road reverb trick kind of tells you to filter out all the frequencies below 600 hertz. And what you'll find in this case is you actually might want those frequencies in there. So instead of really 600 hertz, cutting it off at 600 hertz, you might want to take it down to 100, because now you want a big full reverb. So these are the things you do when you have fewer mix elements. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. I want to say it's counterintuitive, but it really isn't. When you think about it, you kind of think, well, wait a second, this makes sense, because what I'm going to do is there's fewer things, so I have to have them take up more space. Here's something from Eric. Eric says, This is more about recording than it is about mixing. And of course, I'll take any questions that you have that I can answer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be about 101 mixing tricks. I'll take anything. But this one asks, I don't usually track vocals through a compressor. I'll send them back in through mixdown. I think he means back through a compressor during mixdown. Recently, I worked with a fantastic female vocal who performs with so much dynamics, almost a 12 dB spread. It's been very time-consuming mixing her into the track. And looks like he's using multiple compressors and automation, etc. I've never had this issue. Perhaps I could have tried a dynamic mic. What do you think? Well, most engineers that I know will usually have at least a limiter on a vocalist. The reason for that is vocalists tend to get loud in certain places. So you want to control that. You could put a compressor on, and there are many people that do that. I mean, if you go back to Abbey Road, the old EMI training method, Abbey Road training method, what they would do is they would compress everything going in while they're recording it, and then press it and compress it again when they're mixing. And a lot of engineers do that to this day. I prefer to just put a limiter on. And again, if you're going to compress it, usually it's not by much because you can't take it off after you recorded it. So, you know, a dB or two. But you might put a limiter on so when the vocalist gets really loud, or if they get loud, you can control it so it doesn't, you know, really go crazy on you. So I'll usually put a limiter on that's set at, you know, 10 to 1 or 12 to 1 or something like that, maybe even a little higher. And again, it will just take those peaks off. It won't be on all the time. It will just take a few of them off, and that will make your mixing easier. And it will sound pretty good too. So that's something that's worth thinking about. And let's see, here's the next one from Tim. And the question is, if it seems like actually answering the question, or I'm giving you the question before you see it on your screen, it's because I think you're about 30 seconds behind me. And it's just the way the transmission through Google Hangouts works. In this case, the question is, I'm currently in the midst of a drum replacement project for a heavy metal band. I could use some tips on creating a power drums bass combination. Here's the thing, Tim. Everything begins with the original sounds that you have. So many times you'll actually start out with really good drum sounds. They just won't be right for the song. And one of the problems that people will make for themselves is when they replace the drums totally. We'll just put new samples in. And it usually doesn't sound good because it doesn't sound real, because it doesn't matter what program you use to do this. It might not pick up the subtleties of the drummer. Now, in case of a heavy metal drummer with, you know, a guy that's hitting with a lot of power, that might not be the case. But for most of the situations you're in, you're going to find that just totally replacing the drums isn't really going to work. So, as I said in one of the mixing tricks, and I don't remember which one it is, you're best off to enhance the drums. So you'll keep what you have, even if you don't quite like the sounds. And you'll just get new drum sounds that you'll use to enhance it. Now, what this will mean is, once again, the basic sounds that you select have to be really good. So your enhanced sounds, if you have drums that either don't sound good to begin with or aren't right for the track, it doesn't matter. What you want is the attack more than anything. And the body coming from the enhancements that you're putting in from the replacement drums, the enhanced drums, the added drums. But the real critical part is that you want to get really great drum sounds. So the way this works is you can't just sample up some sounds by themselves and say, oh, well, that sounds good. Let me try that. Usually you have to try it in the track. And sometimes something that sounds very crappy will end up by itself, when it's soloed, will end up sounding really good when you actually put it together in the track. So this is a trial and error thing. It's not something that happens like right away where you go, oh, I'm going to try this particular sound. Oh, that sounds good by itself. Let's work with it. It usually doesn't work that way. You may have to go through a bunch of samples until you find what works. But this is the real secret. Again, you're not replacing, you're enhancing the sounds that are there. You're keeping, for the most part, the attack and just adding the body. In this case, if you have a crappy sound or something isn't working, sometimes you're doing less of that. Sometimes you're just adding a little bit more body and you don't really hear it, but it just fills it out. So it really depends. As far as the bass combination, well, again, get the drum sounding good, get the drum sounding great first. And again, always listen to the track and then make your bass work with that. And usually in the case of a metal bass, there's a lot of top end on it. So you're looking at 3K, somewhere in there, 4K. When that happens as well, you have to watch that it doesn't get in the way of anything else. It doesn't get in the way of guitars, and it doesn't get in the way of vocals and the snare. So it's a real tricky thing, and you're going to have to juggle frequencies until you find out what works. Again, if you think this is an instant solution where all you do is dial it up and you're done in 5 minutes, no, it doesn't work like that. Mixing in general doesn't work like that. Mixing takes time. It takes more time than you think. So now we're going to go to, oh, wait, I have a couple of questions. All right. William asks, would the limiter be on your master bus or on the channel strip? I think you mean on, oh, the limiter on your vocal chain, I think you mean. Okay. Yes, it would be on your vocal chain. It wouldn't be on the master bus because that doesn't help you a whole lot. What that will do is it will limit your playback, your monitoring in the room. But it doesn't really help what's going to being recorded. It's going to your DAW. So yeah, that would be in your signal chain, and that's usually a hardware unit. So you'll have that, you know, again, after the mic preamp somehow, you patch it in the console, you patch it in your preamp, something like that. In the case of some virtual systems, like if you have a UAD Apollo, in there you can actually use one of the software limiters, and that kind of works. I'm actually using that when I do the podcasts that I do, the Inner Circle podcasts. So, and that works pretty well. A little tricky to set up, but it still works pretty well. Okay, Flavius has a question. He says, I want to know if it's a habitual practice to use the limiter on every track or the majority of them in some music styles. Okay, well, let's talk about two different situations here. I'm not sure which one you're referring to. So let's say it's in recording first. What would you do? Well, usually you wouldn't put a limiter on everything. You put it on things that might give you a lot of trouble. You'll put it on, now when I say things that might give you a lot of trouble, it means things that have really wide dynamic swings. And usually it's a vocalist. Sometimes it's a dynamic piano player, for instance. It's someone who plays really quietly and then really pounds it. It could be, again, a guitar player does the same thing. It could be a drummer that's playing really quiet and then all of a sudden really hits it. Usually, though, you don't want to do that with the drummer if you can help it, because it does change the sound. And again, once you record it that way, you know, you can't change it later. So I've done that before, where I've recorded with compressors and limiters, and it works okay as long as you're kind of sure you like the sound, but you have to be sure. And it's usually a lot safer to just have something on there to control it. Again, if you're going to use a compressor on anything when you're recording, the safest way is to just knock off a dB or two and not much more. But if you crush something and you really like the sound, yeah, record it that way. Just make sure that you really like it and you're not going to change your mind later. So again, that comes back to you instantly know what you want. You're sure that that sounds great and you're not going to change your mind. Yeah, then I'd put it on, whatever, while recording. Now let's go to the second scenario. The second scenario is when you're mixing. Nowadays, everything has a compressor on. Just about. Why? Well, one is a control factor, and the second one is the fact that it's the sound that everybody kind of likes today. And what I mean by that is, back in the 60s, 70s, even early 80s, there weren't a lot of compressors in the studio. So, and again, if you look back to the 60s, there might only have been 2, 4 at the most in any studio that you had. And even into the 70s, that was the case. There weren't a lot of compressors, so you really you couldn't compress a lot of things. By the way, that's how the New York City compression trick came about. And what it was engineers in New York wanted a punchy sound, but they didn't have enough compressors to be able to compress the kick and the snare separately. So what they did is they put them on a bus and used the compressor across the bus, and then they just started to put other things in there because it sounded so good. And that's kind of the way it started. It was because of the lack of compressors. Well, when the SSL console came out in the 80s, and really the late 70s, but in the 80s is when it got going, there was a compressor on every channel. So suddenly everybody would begin to use them. Again, it was just for control, just so you made sure that you heard everything, and you never lost something. And it might be a word, it might be a guitar note or something, just kind of would dip out. And then, of course, it got to the point where there was a lot of compressors in the room in most studios. And most studios you'll find will have a ton of hardware outboard compressors. But yeah, you're finding that you have to compress. I can't say you're expected to, but it really does give it a sound. And again, different compressors sound differently. So you might want to try, some compressors. That being said, if it sounds really good without it, don't be afraid not to use one, because that really works well as well. And so what works good without a compressor? Electric guitars that are loud and distorted, because they're already compressed a lot. So sometimes they work great by themselves. On the other hand, sometimes you can put something like an LA3, a Universal Audio LA3 across it, and it gives it yet another sound. But they usually live well. Synthesizers sometimes live well by themselves as well without any compression. So those are the things that you want to use. Let's see, is there anybody else that has any questions? Just type them in here. I could, or I think there's a button that you could say, I want to speak, and hopefully I can get you in here if that's the case. Again, I'm kind of new to this software, so if you decide that you would like to ask me a question directly, let me know, and I think I'll see something here that will indicate that, and hopefully we can get you on. By the way, if that happens, and if I do get you on, if you're asking a question, and if I lose you, I'm sorry. But I don't think that'll happen. I think I have the software down. Like I say, I've tried this. We actually experimented with it a couple times earlier in the week, and it seemed to go okay, but this is the first really long live event, real live event that I've been doing. Any more questions that anybody has? Okay, I have a little poll for you. Let me see if I can get it here. So, does everybody see the poll? And it says, which module do you find the most useful? Everybody see that? You can just type in, yeah, I see it. That'd be cool. So it should be up. So if you look under polls, I think, you'll see this poll, which will say, which module do you find the most useful? And, no, I don't see anybody on it yet. You guys see this? Okay. Let me type this in here. Okay, if you guys see the poll, it'd be great if you can just give me a quick answer. Again, I'd kind of like to know what you guys really like and what's particularly working well for you. It'd be really helpful. Okay, Alberto has a question. And of course, if anybody else has any questions, let me know. I recently moved to outboard gear to track the warmth missing from mixing in the box, but I found the bass too loud. I wonder it's from too much warmth. Well, it could be, but I think what that really means is you might have to thin it out. And we're not used to doing that on a bass. You know, it's funny, usually when we record a bass, it's not big enough many times. But I got to tell you, it was kind of like standard procedure in the old days, that especially with a really good sounding precision, to have to roll off some of the bottom, like at 60 cycles or something, because it was just too big sounding. So it really, it's something you should think of. Yeah, the bottom may be too big, but it doesn't mean you can't roll it off. It's something that you know, you should do. And again, there's a mixing trick, and I'm sorry I can't remember them all. I get confused, probably just like you guys do. I don't have them in front of me. Next time we do this, I will have them in front so I can refer to something better. But there's a trick about using the low pass filter along with the EQ. And basically what you do is you take the low pass filter and you move it up to like 60 hertz, and then you EQ at 60 hertz. And you can move that higher. You can move it to 70, 80, 90, whatever it might be. And you find you get a resonant peak there that sounds really good. And you also eliminate a lot of that low end that you didn't have before. So that's a way to do it. But again, don't be afraid to roll off some of that low end on the bass. Okay, Jason has a question. When mixing, how much headroom do you start with? And does it build as the mixing progresses? Yeah, it does. I like to start with the mix somewhere in the -10 area. And this is on the stereo bus meters. And the peaks may go to -6 or something. But on the other hand, if it doesn't go that high, I'm not worried about it either, because I can always make up the gain. What I'm more worried about is if I start the mix and all of a sudden it's at -2 or it's peaking, you know, right out of the box, just, you know, with the drum kit. That's no good. That doesn't work. So what I do is whatever you're starting with, I back it off so you have a fair amount of headroom. You know, in the old days, again, there was kind of a couple of ways that we do it. And I say the old days, I mean, we're mixing on consoles with tape and stuff like that, you know, before DAWs. The way we do it is, you know, again, you kind of start at -10, knowing that every time you put another instrument in it, it'd go up, you know, 3 dB or so if it was at the same level. And there are some engineers I know that would start at -7, and they would have the kick drum, for instance, and the snare and the bass all at -7 and start there. That's not necessarily a good way to do it. Some people can do it that way, but I'm just telling you the way that I've seen people do it and be very successful too. So what ends up happening there is, before you know it, and again, if we're looking at VU meters, and you start at -7, for instance, or -10, before you know it, you're at +4, which is peaking into the red on the LED meters that the peak LED meters that we use today. So, and again, we didn't mind if it was peaking into the red back then, into, you know, on a VU meter into +4. It actually sounded good. We liked it when we were mixing the tape. It wasn't a bad thing. But we had plenty of headroom in the console. We had another 20 dB of headroom beyond that. So it wouldn't distort, so we never worried about it. We worried more about what the tape sounded like. If the tape sounded compressed, because there's a little bit of tape compression that kind of automatically happened. So that's the way it was done back then. And then when people started mixing the box, they tried kind of the same approach. It didn't work the same way. Because again, the meters are different, and the way everything is reacting is different. The VU meters react much different than the peak meters that we use, the peak LED meters that we use on DAWs. So again, what I would do is I'd start around -10, and if it was lower than that, I wouldn't worry about it, because you can always raise it up. Now again, if you've looked at, oh, I think it's number 15. It's the one, or 18. It's the trick with the loud mix trick. And what it is, there's a compressor on the bus and then a limiter. And that's something we'd never do in the old days of tape, but now you kind of have to. So the limiter is set, so you're never going to go into the red no matter what. And your gain, up or down, is going to come from the compressor. So this is kind of easy. If all of a sudden the gain, you know, isn't high enough, then you'll either goose that a little bit or you'll lower it. But again, you can do the same thing with the master fader, and it's not too much of a big deal. So let's see how the polls are going. I hope I answered your question, Jason. No, everybody seems to like Module 5 and vocals. Okay, like that. Anybody else have any questions? Very happy to answer whatever, anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be mixing. It could be anything about recording or even the music business. And I'm very up for that. Let's see, we've got some more people that joined in. It's Jason, William, Oliver, John-Luc, Alberto, Flavius, Norman, Paulo, George, Gerardo. Okay, okay. Get into. Okay, Flavius said yes, but I didn't get until a course in. Okay, I don't exactly know what you mean. So, if you can help me with that. Actually, you know what? We're gonna try this. I'm actually going to invite you in as a speaker here, so you can talk directly to me and tell me what's going on. So all you got to do is just follow the prompts. This is Flavius here. Okay, how are we doing? You see the prompt? I don't see you coming up here. Well, I hope I didn't get rid of you, and I apologize if I did. Again, it's the software here, and okay, maybe Flavius doesn't want to speak. So if that's the case, I'm sorry if I brought you in here prematurely. And unfortunately, I can't bring you back in until I see you here. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we're going to shut it down until next time. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, I apologize if it didn't run as smoothly as usual. This was the very first time we did this, but I figured that it'd be a better way to do it because more of you can join in than previously. It's much more convenient than doing it as a telephone call, a conference call. So I'm hoping that this is going to work for everybody and it's going to work better. By the way, it's being recorded right now and you're going to see it on, well, I'm going to upload it very soon. Okay, here's Jean-Luc. One last question. How to use a multiband compressor on a bass track to control a frequency boost. Well, that's kind of easy. What you do is on the low frequencies, you would lower the threshold, and it's just on that one frequency, and that's a real good way to do it. Actually, what you'll find is it allows you to leave all the other frequencies intact except for that one band. That's a really good way to do it. And we forget about it. I forget about multi-band compressors. They're very, very powerful. One of the problems with using them is they usually take up a lot more horsepower. So you can't use them on every channel, which is too bad because they really do work well. But yeah, if you have a problem element, mix element, I would, before you begin to EQ a lot, that's a much better way to do it. Go to a multi-band compressor. And also, don't necessarily think that it's the lowest frequencies that are giving you a problem, like on a bass. Sometimes, and again, usually we think, oh, it might be 60 hertz or 80 hertz, somewhere in there, but it might be higher. It might be 120 or something, where there's too much there. It might be even higher than that, 240, where it just is jumping out at you. So check out those frequencies as well. Okay, Jean-Luc? All right. One last chance here. How are we doing? Any other questions? Thanks again for attending. Thanks for answering the poll. I appreciate it. And as always, I love your feedback. Let me know what you think about 101 mixing tricks, which are the ones you like, which are the ones you don't like. And by the way, there'll be some new ones coming down the pike that you'll get for free pretty soon that I'm working on. Just some bonus ones that we'll throw in there in due time. I can't say exactly when, but you'll start to see some. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And next month we'll do it a little earlier than the last day of the month. And usually I like to do it like the third weekend, and that's what we'll do in May. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed, as always, doing anything I can to help you. So take care, and we'll do this again soon.